There are about 7,000 languages spoken on Earth right now. 7,000 different ways to say I love you. 7,000 ways to ask for directions. 7,000 ways to order a sandwich and then spend 20 minutes arguing about whether you actually ordered it. English, Mandarin, Swahili, Klingon. And the strangest thing about all of them isn't how different they are, it's what they share. In every single one, you can ask a question. In every one, there is no longest sentence. Whatever you say, you can always add, and then she said. That is not a coincidence. That is a family resemblance. Because all 7,000 of these languages descend from a single gift in a single species that appeared at one point in history. The most important invention ever made happened before anyone invented anything. You are using it right now, without a single thought, to narrate your own life. And it is roughly 135,000 years old. Everything you say is a fossil. Now, here's the frustrating thing about studying where language came from. Language leaves no fossils, no bones, no shards, no footprints. A stone axe survives 100,000 years. A sentence survives about half a second. So every tool we have for studying the past, skulls, genes, primate brains, cave paintings, gestures, is archaeology of ghosts. We are trying to photograph something that never stopped moving, which is exactly why the answer keeps changing. Every generation of scientists has been wrong about language in a slightly more interesting way than the last. And I promise you, the people who are right today will look wrong tomorrow. That's not a bug in the science. It's the subject. You can't carbon date a word. You can only hunt for its shadow. So let's start by killing the most popular theory of all time. The grunting caveman, Ooga Booga. The idea that language began when a guy in a fur coat pointed at a mammoth and went ugh. There's a problem with this picture, and it's not just the fur coat. Ape calls are fixed. They are involuntary. They cannot be recombined. A chimpanzee cannot take one alarm call and one food call and stitch them together into there's food over there and also danger, be careful but bring a fork. That's not a simpler version of language. That's a completely different thing. Real language is open-ended. You can say a sentence that has never been said before in the history of the universe, and in fact, the sentence you're reading right now has never been said before. I wrote it just for you. That's not a party trick. That's the definition of the entire system. The caveman isn't a step toward language. The caveman is a cartoon of something that never existed. So if grunts didn't do it, what did? The first big clue came from a gene with a strange name, FOXP2. In 2002, scientists announced they had found the language gene, a version that only humans carried, and it looked like it had been pushed through a fast, recent, human-specific evolution. It became the poster child of language science. Textbooks were printed, documentaries were made, and then the plot thickened. The Neanderthals, our closest relatives, the ones the caveman cartoons are actually based on, carried the exact same version, the exact same gene. And in 2018, a careful study found no evidence of that supposed human-specific evolution at all. The poster child was quietly taken down, which is the single best lesson language science has to teach. There is no one language gene. Language is an orchestra, and FOXP2 is one violin, a real violin. An important violin, but no single instrument wrote the symphony. Anyone who tells you they found the gene for language is telling you a story that already ended. So if there's no switch, how do we date the thing? We date the mind. Around 100,000 years ago, our ancestors started doing something new. They began using ochre, red pigment, not because they were hungry, but because they wanted to paint. They engraved marks on shells and bones. They wore ornaments. None of that is food. None of that is shelter. It is meaning beyond need, the first footprints of a symbolic mind. And here's the genetic anchor. Modern humans split into separate groups around 135,000 years ago, and every single group that split apart carried full language with them. Everyone. You don't inherit a language in your genes, you inherit the capacity for it. So the best current estimate is this. The capacity for full language was present at least 135,000 years ago, before the first cave painting, before the first ornament, before anyone had invented a single thing to say it with. Language didn't show up late because it was a fancy extra. It showed up first because it was the foundation everything else got built on. But here's the twist that almost nobody knows. It might not have started with the voice at all. It might have started with the hands. Here's the evidence. Great apes have almost no voluntary control over their voices. You cannot teach a chimpanzee to hold a conversation, their mouths simply won't do what they're told. But their hands, you can teach a chimp hundreds of signs. And in the wild, apes already use flexible, learned gestures that carry real meaning. An open hand offered forward means share. An open hand held out means give me. Gesture was the thing the primate brain could already do. The theory, championed for decades by the psychologist Michael Corbelli's, is that language began as gesture and only later found its way into sound. And the proof that sign language is full language? Nicaragua. In the 1970s, deaf children were brought together in a school. Nobody taught them sign language. They built one. Within a single generation of schoolchildren, a full grammar emerged, complex, structured, spatial, elegant, invented by kids out of nothing in one schoolyard. Language does not need a teacher. It needs a brain. And that brain was ready for the hands long before it was ready for the voice. So why did we switch to the voice at all? Because after the switch, your hands were free. Free to carry. Free to throw. Free to hunt. Free to make tools while still talking. Speech works in the dark. It works through trees. It costs nothing. It is the only tool you can use while doing the dishes. But here's the trade, and it's a brutal one. The human larynx sits low in the throat, far lower than a newborn's, far lower than any ape's. That low larynx is what creates the space to make vowels, and it comes with a cost. It blocks your airway. Every human on Earth is evolutionarily choking prone. You can die because a piece of food went down the wrong pipe. Great apes basically cannot choke on their own food. We can. That is a bizarre thing to evolve unless the payoff was enormous. Evolution traded a little bit of choking risk for the ability to say, the berries are over there, past the rock that looks like a bear. Worth it. 135,000 years later, still worth it. So let's take stock. By at least 135,000 years ago, the gift existed. Full, combinable, symbolic language. And for 135,000 years, give or take, that gift existed with no writing. No books, no records. Every story, every law, every recipe, every joke passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation for more than 100,000 years. No backup, no hard drive, nothing to write it down with. But in all that silence, where did the actual words come from? Where did the grammar come from? And why does your language use so few of the sounds your mouth can make? That's the next act. Let's talk about the raw material. Sound. Your mouth is a machine that can produce an almost infinite variety of sounds, and your language, whichever one you speak, uses a tiny slice of them. English has about 27 consonant sounds and 40 sounds in total. Hawaiian has 13 letters, 5 vowels, 8 consonants. You could learn the entire Hawaiian alphabet in an afternoon, and that is not a shame, it's an efficiency. Now let's go the other way. In southern Africa, there's a language called Zulu. It has around 130 consonants. Read that again, 130. Many of them are clicks, the same sound you make when you disapprove of something. Tusk. In English, that's a noise you make at a bad driver. In Zulu, it's a letter. Its close cousin Ju packs 105 consonants into every single word. Here's your challenge for this section. Try to say every sound in your own language. Count them as you go. Then imagine a language with more than 100 and a mouth that can tell them all apart. And here's the myth we need to kill while we're here. Clicks are not ancient leftovers. They are not a window into some primitive, ancestral speech. Most linguists think they developed relatively late. The most complex sound systems on Earth are not old, they are spectacular. They are proof of how far the mouth machine can go. So now the building blocks. Words. Where do words come from? 3 big ways. Borrowing. English has spent centuries lifting words from other languages, and it doesn't even bother to pay them back. Creating. Every generation invents new ones. Your grandparents never said selfie. And slow drift, the words that quietly change meaning over the centuries. But here's the part that should make your jaw drop. Linguists have reconstructed words that no living human has ever spoken. There's a reconstructed ancestor language called Proto-Indo-European, the great-great-grandparent of English, Hindi, Persian, Russian, Spanish, and hundreds more. And in the 1800s, linguists ran into a problem. The grammar of this ancestor language only worked if it had certain consonants. Consonants that no surviving language had preserved. The math said these ghost sounds had to exist, so they were written down with a symbol, a placeholder, like X in an equation, and the whole field shrugged and said they must have been there, We just can't hear them anymore. Then, in 1927, a linguist named Jerzy Karolowicz found one. In an ancient language called Hittite, the ghost sound was sitting right there, spelled out in the clay. A sound that had been predicted by pure logic 50 years before anyone laid eyes on it. Language detectives reconstructed a ghost and then found its fossil. That is how we know language is not random noise. It obeys laws. It leaves fingerprints. Now the engine that actually makes language work. Grammar, the sentence machine. And here's the mystery that has split linguists for 60 years. Nobody teaches children grammar. Not really. And yet every 4-year-old on Earth masters the most complicated system their culture has ever built, years before they can tie their shoes. Here's the proof it's not imitation. Children say, "I goed to the park." No adult has ever said, "I goed." They invented it. They didn't copy it. They built it from a rule they somehow extracted from the noise around them. That single observation destroyed a whole school of psychology in 1959, when a young linguist named Noam Chomsky demolished the most famous behaviorist theory of the day. His claim, the human brain comes pre-wired for grammar, a universal grammar that every language is a variation on. Other scientists disagree just as passionately. They say children learn grammar the way they learn everything, by pattern, by repetition, by a billion examples. And then there's the wild card. In the Amazon, there's a language called Paraha. Its famous claim to fame, no recursion. No Mary thinks that John said that. No nesting. No number words beyond roughly 1 and 2. No color words. The linguist who studied it for decades argues this proves grammar is not innate, it's shaped by culture. His critics argue just as loudly that he got the analysis wrong. This is a real, live, unresolved fight in science, which is honestly the most exciting thing about it. The grammar in your head, built by 4-year-olds, argued over by professors, still unexplained. And then there's the vocabulary. The dictionary of a living language is not a static thing. It's a living creature. It grows, it sheds, and sometimes the whole animal dies. Roughly 500 languages have been recorded as going extinct in the span of written history. That's the conservative number. Around 7,000 languages were being spoken natively around the year 2000. And in 2004, an influential estimate warned that up to 90% of them could be gone by 2050. 90%. If that lands, the world loses thousands of languages within our lifetimes. Here's what that looks like close up. Yuchai, a Native American language, was down to a handful of elderly fluent speakers, people who grew up when the language was still alive in the home. When the last one is gone, the language is gone, not lost the way you lose your keys, gone the way a species goes extinct. Every grammar, every joke, every song, every way of carving up the world with sound. Gone because nobody handed it to the next generation. A language dies when the last child stops learning it, not when the last speaker dies, when the last child stops learning it. That's the whole secret. That's the whole tragedy. And that's the whole hope, too. Here's where we pause, and I want you to feel the weight of this. For roughly 135,000 years, humans carried every idea, every memory, every law, every song in their heads and in their mouths. No backup, no hard drive, no writing. One careless generation and everything was gone. And then, astonishingly late in the story, around 5,500 years ago, one civilization, in a dusty corner of the world, figured out how to freeze sound into stone. That is the moment everything changes. See you after the break. It happened in Sumer in what is now southern Iraq around 3200 BC. The Sumerians invented the world's first writing system. And here's the beautiful, human, hilarious detail. They didn't invent it to write poetry. They invented it for accounting. Grain, sheep, taxes. Somebody owed somebody else 42 jugs of beer, and they needed it on the record. So they pressed little pictures into wet clay with a reed. A pictograph for grain, a pictograph for beer. And here's what happened next, the part that makes archaeologists emotional. Those little pictures started to drift. They became abstract. They became wedges. That's literally what the word cuneiform means, wedge-shaped. And once they did, the system could do something the Sumerians never imagined. It could write down the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest great work of literature on Earth, written in a script that began as a receipt for grain. Writing was not invented to be beautiful. It was invented because someone needed to be paid, and then it became beautiful anyway. Never forget that. The most magnificent thing humans ever built started as a bill. Now, cuneiform was hard, hundreds of symbols. If you wanted to write, you had to spend years becoming a scribe. Writing was a profession, like blacksmithing. Then, around 1200 BC, a seafaring people on the eastern Mediterranean coast, the Phoenicians, had an idea so good it's still running the world. Instead of symbols for things, they made symbols for sounds. A tiny alphabet. A child could learn it. Trade was the engine, and the alphabet was the hack. And then it multiplied. The Greeks took it and added vowels, the first time vowels ever got a written home. Rome carried the Latin version across an empire. Europe built its own children, Runic in the north, Cyrillic in the east. Nearly every major writing system on the planet traces its family tree back to that one Phoenician idea. And here's the fossil hidden inside your keyboard. The Phoenician letters had names, and the names were things. The second letter was called bet, a house. You know it is B. The third letter was gimel, a camel. Your G is a picture of a camel, worn smooth by 3,000 years of writing. The fourth letter was dalet, a door. Your D is a door. Every time you type a G, you are typing a Phoenician camel that spent 3,000 years slowly turning into a letter. Your alphabet is not abstract. It is a museum of camels and doors and houses. But the alphabet is not the only way to do it. There's another path, and it produced one of the great wonders of human civilization. Around 1200 BC, the same century as the Phoenician alphabet, on the other side of the world, the Shang dynasty of China was carving characters into bone. Turtle shells, ox shoulder blades. For divination, asking the gods questions and reading the answers in the cracks of the heated bone. About 150,000 of these oracle bones have been found, and here's the astonishing part. That writing system never stopped. It never became an alphabet. Chinese characters are still logographs. Each one is a word, a unit of meaning, not a sound. 3,000 years of continuous evolution. Oracle bone script, seal script, clerical script, regular script. The characters on a Chinese menu today are the direct descendants of marks scratched onto bone before Rome existed. And that's not a quirk. It's a superpower. Because a logograph doesn't care what your dialect sounds like. A speaker of Mandarin and a speaker of Cantonese can read the same sentence, pronounce it completely differently, and understand each other perfectly, because the meaning lies in the character, not the sound. An alphabet would have shattered China's unity. The characters are the glue that held 3,000 years and 1 billion people together. The most successful writing system in human history is the one that refused to become an alphabet. Now, some of these ancient languages we can read as easily as a newspaper. Others are still locked. The Rosetta Stone, found in Egypt in 1799, carried the same decree in 3 scripts: hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. One stone, 3 languages, one of them known. That key cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs, a writing system that had been silent for 1,600 years. And suddenly, the pyramids could speak. But not every door has a Rosetta Stone. The Indus Valley civilization left thousands of seals with a script no one has ever cracked. It's too short, and there's no bilingual key. Linear A from ancient Crete is still unread. The Voynich manuscript, a medieval book written in a language that might not even exist, has defeated every codebreaker on Earth. And on Easter Island, a script called Rongorongo, one of the last independently invented writing systems, died with the people who could read it. Here's your second challenge. Go look at an undeciphered script. The Indus seals are a good one. Stare at it for a minute, try to make sense of it. That is the feeling of standing in front of a locked door in human history. Language detectives are still on the case. The stories locked in those unread scripts are the greatest unfinished novels we have. And once language could be written, the race was on to write it faster. For most of history, writing was an elite's club. A single book had to be copied by hand, letter by letter, by a scribe who'd spent a lifetime learning the trade. Books cost what a house costs. Literacy was the privilege of priests, kings, and the rich, because information itself was their monopoly. If a community was destroyed, its knowledge died with it. Then, around 1450, a German metalworker named Johannes Gutenberg figured out how to cast movable type. The printing press. For the first time, you could make books faster than people could copy them. The Gutenberg Bible, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, all of it downstream of movable type. And here's the quiet detail that matters for our story. The printing press froze spelling. Before print, you spelled language any way you liked, nobody was keeping score. After print, one version got locked in, printed a million times, and became the law. Writing had fossilized speech. Printing fossilized writing. Every spelling you ever fought in a spelling bee is a 400-year-old fossil, pressed into stone by a machine. But here's what writing can't do. It can't stop languages from moving. Writing is a photograph, a frozen moment. The languages themselves never stopped. And that movement is the whole story of the modern world. So let me show you what happens when one language quietly becomes many. Take Latin, not the polished Latin of the senators. The everyday Latin, the working Latin, vulgar Latin spoken by farmers and soldiers across the Roman Empire. Around the 5th century, the empire collapsed, and the provinces stopped talking to each other. And in each province, the Latin kept drifting in its own direction, one generation at a time. A few hundred years later, people in France couldn't understand people in Spain. Neither could understand people in Italy. Same language at the start, 5 or 6 at the end. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, one seed, many trees, no invasion, no new language dropped from the sky. Just ordinary human drift, generation by generation, until the speakers couldn't understand each other anymore. And that is not a special case. That is the model for every language family on Earth. English, Hindi, Persian, Russian, Spanish, all drifted apart from one ancestor language the exact same way. And here's the part most people never realize. India. Sanskrit, the sacred language of the Vedas, dating back to around 1500 BC, is Indo-European. Same family as English. Meanwhile, Tamil, one of the world's great classical languages, written in a script that goes back to the 3rd century BC, belongs to a completely different family. Dravidian. Two ancient, magnificent literary traditions. Neighbors for thousands of years, speaking unrelated languages, united on paper by one family of scripts, the descendants of Brahmi. The oldest language arguments you see online, with people insisting their language must be the first, those arguments are political, not scientific. Languages are not in a race to be first. They are a forest, and they've been branching for thousands of years. So now we're back to the numbers. And they're heavy. The estimate that 90% of the world's languages could be gone by 2050. The 500 already recorded as extinct. Yuchai's last speakers. But here's the plot twist. A language is not a species. It doesn't have a fixed lifespan. It can die, and it can come back. Hebrew is the great resurrection story. For almost 2,000 years, it was a language of prayer and scripture, not daily life. No children learned it in the home. And then, in the late 19th and 20th centuries, a people decided to bring it back to life. Today, Hebrew is a living, growing first language for millions of children. The only large-scale resurrection of a dead language in human history. And it happened in about 1 century. Closer to home, Mōri, New Zealand's indigenous language, was sliding toward extinction. A grassroots movement started what they called language nests, Kohanga Rio, where elders came into preschools and spoke nothing but Mōri to the kids. One generation of children, taught by their grandparents, and the language turned around. A language doesn't die because it's tired. It dies because we stop handing it over. And if one generation decides to hand it over, it comes back. That's not sentiment. That's the mechanism. The same mechanism that killed the 500. The same mechanism that could save the thousands. So now, the payoff. The thing I promised you at the start, everything you say is a fossil. Let's take it apart, piece by piece. The sounds in your voice are made by a larynx that evolved to trade a little choking risk for speech 135,000 years ago. The words you use were shaped by borrowing and drift, and, sometimes, by ghost consonants that linguists predicted before they ever found them. The grammar in your head was assembled by the brain of a 4-year-old. The same kind of brain that built a full language in a Nicaraguan schoolyard. The same kind of brain that's currently getting 2 professors into a fight over a language in the Amazon. The letters you're reading, right now, are Phoenician camels and doors and houses, worn smooth by 3,000 years of typing. The spelling was frozen by a printing press. And the language carrying all of it is drifting, splitting, reviving, and dying right now, one generation at a time. Because that is what languages have always done. Since before the first word was ever written down, you are not speaking a language. You are time-traveling through one. Every single thing you say at breakfast, at work, in a text you'll regret, is the youngest leaf on a tree that is 135,000 years old. Which brings me back to our old friend, the grunting caveman. He showed up at the start of this video, all ooga booga, ready to tell us how it all began. But by now, he's realized it's a little more complicated. There's no single moment when someone grunted and a language appeared. There's no single gene, no single date, no alphabet of truth waiting to be found. Just one long, unbroken chain of brains and mouths and hands handing the same impossible gift forward. Generation after generation, for 135,000 years. So here's the honest ending. The caveman never did learn to talk, but he did learn to write. Someone handed him a pen, and that's the whole story. Language is the only invention that had to be invented before there was anyone to invent it for, and it's still being invented by you every single time you open your mouth. Everything you say is a fossil. Go make some new ones.